Welcome to the Bodybuilding Banter podcast, your number one source of all things bodybuilding. Be sure to like and subscribe to stay up to date on future episodes. Now, here's your host, Leroy Rollins.
All right, people, welcome to the podcast. I'm here with, I've had an Australian guest on before, so I can't say you took that, my friend, but introduce yourself to the people and we'll just see where this conversation goes.
Hey guys, my name is Brandon Kempter, I'm a natural bodybuilder, pro natural bodybuilder with ICN and IMBA. I also work as a contest preparation coach, and that's essentially me.
Right on. So let's go way back, man. When did this all start for you? What got you into bodybuilding? Obviously, our sport is very, very niche, and even more so on the natural side of things. So where did that all start for you?
Yeah, absolutely. So, look, I guess I probably wasn't the most physically active child through my young years. However, in high school, I got in senior years, I got quite involved in distance running, which is quite a different tangent to bodybuilding. But I love the challenge it presented. But it really didn't afford me the capacity to look how I wanted. And then in my final years in high school, I got involved in the weight room. Absolutely loved that. And I started competing in natural bodybuilding in my late teens. I was 19 when I first got on stage, and I competed through teens, juniors, into opens, into the pro league over the past, essentially, just under 10 years.
That's awesome. So quickly touching on competing as a teen, I actually started at 21, so I was a little bit later than yourself. Do you think, in hindsight, you would have started that early, or would you have waited a little bit?
Look, I think it was a great introduction at that point. And look, at that stage, the standard of bodybuilding, as you know, has increased dramatically over the years. And don't get me wrong, the standard was certainly quite high at that point, but definitely not to the same level of consistent high-level conditioning we're seeing today. Yeah. So it wasn't as aggressive on the body as today's bodybuilding endeavors, but I think it was definitely a great start. I was certainly a very determined athlete, and surprisingly, or I should say luckily, I had some great mentors at that point that really kickstarted my career in a positive way. I think a lot of people start in the first few years of their bodybuilding career as sort of a bit wishy-washy, whereas I had the pleasure of really commencing, with good mentors and relatively well-informed. So it was a great start, I do believe.
That's awesome. So you were coached then? You didn't go in by yourself at that time?
The first show, I didn't actually have a coach in my corner, but what I did have at that point, I was studying exercise science. So the mechanistic side of things was really coming together. And then in my junior season in the follow-on, I did have a coach in my corner, and it was definitely helpful. Just as you know, just to be objective is virtually impossible. Yeah. And on top of that, there's definitely an art to coaching, and working with the few coaches I have, or a couple of coaches rather, that I have over my career has been very instrumental in terms of just creating good judgment, even in my own coaching. These were the sort of guys that would just look at you, walk around you, pinch your midsection, and say, you need to crack the whip, or you're looking good. So there's a lot of benefit to it, absolutely.
That's awesome. So let's go through kind of your series of competitions. So you started out as a teen, 1 show, 2 shows. What was that whole process like for you?
Well, I'll tell you what. The first time I got on stage was an amazing experience, as it is for, hopefully, as it is for a lot of people, as it sets the trajectory for their career. And when I competed the first time, I didn't actually know if I was going to be any good at this thing. I just basically came in and said, I've got this piece of canvas that is my physique. Let's see how far we can take it.
Sure.
So I got on stage the first time. I won first place, which was mind-blowing because I certainly didn't walk in there with any ego or any expectation. And that season was a little bit longer than I first anticipated. I competed at a state level show for one federation. I competed at a state level show for another federation. And then in the follow-on, I jumped in my Nissan Pulsar, drove, it was about 1,000 kilometers, so it's 600 miles or something, and filled up oil at every single petrol stop, and it just made it to Sydney, and competed at nationals, and that's where I finished my season with was still a top 3 placing at a national level, which I was really over the moon about at that time. Then in the follow-on, I did juniors the year after. I did a very similar. I competed from state to national level. Then I had a couple of years off because obviously it's a timely process, natural bodybuilding. And I competed in 2016. Then I won my pro card at that occasion. On that occasion, I competed internationally. And then I had another couple of years off and competed most recently in 2019. And on that occasion, that was a monster season. That was pro shows here in Australia. Then I dashed over to the US. I did OCB, WNBF, and IBA over there, and it was an absolute ball of fun.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So let's go through, I guess, kind of your off seasons, and you touched on that the natural body is very, very slow process, and there seems to be kind of like this graduation of like I'm gonna just call it a beginner physique to then that pro level physique. There just seems to be a very noticeable change. So what do you think kind of attributed to that? What did you do in those off seasons? Were you very strict and regimented? Did you allow yourself some flexibility? Were you like, no, if I'm going to do this, I'm going all in for these next few years? Like, what was your whole mindset for that off season?
Look. I mean, as you know, the off season is really based around 3 primary yet intertwined components. Maximizing muscle mass, within that, optimizing symmetry, and lastly is optimizing overall health and maximizing metabolic capacity, so that you've got a physique that's robust enough to take the stress of getting to today's level of conditioning. And the way I would approach the off season is that's the lifestyle component. In that, bodybuilders always say it's a lifestyle, and I would say contest preparation is not a lifestyle that you want to do for any length of time. You make a lot of sacrifices. You live in your box. You get stuff done. The off season, I always say it's about balancing, or I suppose appealing to your own definition of balance between creating an optimal result and living a little. So if you're going to travel, that's the time you're going to do it, right? I dare say that I'm probably, from a personal perspective, a little bit. I do like to go all in. I had very, very obsessive behavioral traits. Some would argue this is a good thing. It's afforded me the capacity to excel in the sport I love and to, focus on my learning from an academic perspective. But I suppose it had its negatives in some ways. So I'm pretty much all in across the board. And those off seasons had to unfortunately get a little bit longer as my career went on, simply because to recover from today's the stress required to get to today's level of conditioning, that takes longer, and bodybuilding's a slower process.
For sure. What was the change in weight from kind of like peak off season to stage?
This obviously changed over the years. Last time was fairly substantial. So my last off season prior to the 2019 season, at the peak of the off season, I got up to around 103. I do believe the highest I ever got was 105 kilos in pounds. I'm not entirely sure. Times that by 2.2, so 220-ish or something. And that was the peak. I did have a pre-preparatory phase, so to prepare for the contest preparation at about 12 months out from the actual show. That brought me into sort of high 97s, so high 90s, so maybe 98, 97. And I actually got on stage at around 80 kilograms and fully depleted. I think I may have hit 79 kilos. So I was a middleweight for WNBF.
Okay. Do you think that there's a place for kind of the old school bulks anymore? There's a kind of a battle that seems to be going on in the fitness industry, specifically natural bodybuilding, where they argue, some say that, pushing up considerable amounts over stage weight, whether that's 20, 30, 40 pounds, and then some say that as you get more progressive in your career, you may not necessarily have to do that, and you can stay on the leader side of things. What's your mindset towards that?
I think it's contextually dependent, and there's a lot of variability person to person. I think when it comes to the off season, you want to have enough fat mass to have normal endocrinological function, optimized overall health, but not too much that you're within a disproportionate striking distance to contest weight. Now, I think that there is a lot of interpersonal difference as to where that rests.
Yeah.
For me personally, I like to be in good shape, but I know the most productive realm for me to be in has me quite a fair way above stage weight. Okay. And for me to consistently lift the big loads that I require to maximize growth, I need to have a little bit of fat mass on my physique. Otherwise, I'm not as bulletproof, and I can't manage those high training volumes. So I do tend to get quite considerably above stage weight. The way with my body fat distribution patterns, I tend to hold a lot of fat mass around my glutes, not that you would know at comp time, and my legs. So I generally still look semi-lean. Yeah. You still got a 6-pack of abs. I'm like, if I lose that, I'm really fat. Yeah. So that's, I suppose, that's a genetically predetermined piece. But for me personally, I do need to get a little bit higher. But from a coaching perspective, I would approach this very much on a case-by-case basis. I have individuals that I would categorize as greyhounds, people that can stay relatively lean, and tick all those aforementioned boxes, and I have others that maybe need to get a little bit higher.
Yep, I would agree, and kind of echoing what you were saying there about body fat distribution. Like, I was 192 pounds peak off season, and I compete in the lightweights, so that's close to 40, almost 50 pounds actually was peak off season, and I can still have that little semblance of a 6-pack. A couple arm veins on an arm day is flowing. So like you can still have that, perceived look of somewhat leanness, but when you compare it to a stage lean, it is very far off. But no, I agree with you. It's very, very person dependent on that, right?
And we are bodybuilders. We started lifting because we want to look good. And yes, we do. The bodybuilding purist in us really focuses on, okay, we'll sacrifice our look temporarily for the stage, for the sake of looking the best then. But we still want to look okay. You don't want to. The last thing you want to do is walk in the gym and is this guy a bodybuilder or not? Yeah. Like that's not on.
Yeah, and it's the battle of, I know, like in my off season, like I was starting to fill out larges, which I'd never done before, and that felt good as a bodybuilder. At the end of the day, still want to be bigger, right? So there was a little bit of ego on that side of it too.
It's funny. I always say, in the off season, you look great in clothes. Yep. In contest preparation, you look great naked. Yeah. Because you look horrible in clothes. Like I could sit there and I'm working on my computer and I'm swimming in my my clothes. Yeah. It's just horrible when you're contest lean. But then you get a pump, you take your shirt off, and people say, "Hey, that guy's not natty at all." And you're like, "Are you serious?" I would walk down the street and you wouldn't even know I lifted.
Yeah, I get people comment on like stage photos or something, and they'll be like, "Man, you're huge." I'm like, 150 pounds isn't huge last time I checked.
That's all part of the process, yes.
100%. So what was your experience in the different organizations? Because I think that's something, too, a lot of natural athletes do now get the opportunity to do is experience different organizations, whereas on the, up here, for example, in Canada, there's really only one main organization, and that is affiliated with the IFBB. Mind you, there is a natural stream to that, but it's still under the same umbrella. So I actually went down to the States last year to compete in the IMBF, WMBF. So that was my first show down there. So what was your experience with, obviously you're in the ICN, you did the WMBF, I think you mentioned OCB. What was your overall experience with that?
Yeah, last year I did branch out across a few different federations. Here in Australia, we've particularly across over the past, let's say 5 years, there seems to be a lot more diversity in federations for the natural athlete. and look, everyone wants a slightly different look.
Yeah.
I think that bodybuilding, it's all pretty similar. When you get into, those categories like, for example, bikini for women or fitness, then there seems to be a drastic difference in what level of conditioning they deem is suitable for that category. But given that bodybuilding is the top tier, so to speak, you can never be too big, or too symmetrical or too shredded.
Yeah.
I will say that some federations have slightly different definitions of what they deem as symmetrical. That differs a little bit. But generally speaking, for natural federations, as you know, it's really quality over quantity. Yeah. So most people are going to reward that symmetry, appropriate muscle size, that symmetry and conditioning. But I really enjoyed, obviously, ICN I've competed with for years. INBA, I did enjoy their shows as well. They're very similar, I suppose, to ICN. They used to be somewhat interlinked, and then sour a few years ago. OCB, I competed in a show in Portland. Which everyone says, why did you compete in Portland? I actually, we looked on the map and went, okay, what's 3 shows in a row? We just went, cool, let's do that show in Portland. So it was a really small show, the smallest show I've ever done. I've never done a show with less than, 150 competitors. So this show was there was just no one there. So I don't think that was a good reflection of OCB. Right. But the WNBF, which was really a show that I've been pushing for years, was fantastic. It was great to get to attend a show where there was literally, I couldn't tell you, 30, 40 countries all backstage. So that was definitely an experience. And I knew that they, I suppose, appreciate a well-conditioned and balanced physique. And I'm definitely not the biggest guy, that's for sure. So it comes down to quality. So I really enjoy competing with them, and I'll certainly do that again in future.
Awesome. What was your biggest takeaway going into like pro shows from amateur shows?
I think that when it comes to being a pro, I think I always say this: being a pro, pros are pros before they're pros. Being a pro is essentially a mentality.
Yep.
And when you're looking at a pro lineup, the difference between first and third place could be all of a couple of points. And it really comes down to crossing your T's and dotting your I's. When we look at, say, it really comes down to optimizing everything. You might look at a body of literature on a particular supplement and deem that it gives you a 2% potential difference. I would say, is 2% worth it looking longitudinally across a 1 to 2 year period for a pro athlete? Absolutely. Yep. So you're really just looking at optimizing everything from both a nutritive perspective and a training perspective, and bring it 100%. And then obviously when it comes to presentation, there's also a bigger expectation. If you walk on stage and you're on expect to be on stage for 25 minutes.
Yeah.
If you don't have that posing endurance, then forget it. And they tend to be more aggressive in judging you on that, in that if they're going to hold you on stage for 25 minutes and you're cramping at 5 minutes, you can't hold your quads on. It's like preparing for a marathon and then tripping over at the finish line. So the presentation side of things is amped up big time. Yeah. So, know your physique, know your strengths, your flaws, know how to present it as best possible, have the posing endurance on the day. And obviously be a good representation of their federation. I think that, the federation has pride in their pros. You should have pride in the federation. So make sure that you're presenting yourself both on stage and in the public eye in an appropriate manner.
That's awesome. You mentioned small things that add up, those little 1% and 2%. Could you list maybe 5 things that maybe people overlook that you think would add up at that level?
I can give you a few bits and pieces. I definitely think that number one, a general trend I see with high-level athletes is just the mentality they bring to the gym. I think that really good natural bodybuilders have a unique level of trainability under diet-related fatigue, and there are a myriad of potential points that contribute to your immediate training performance. However, I dare say your psychological not that I'm a psychologist, mind you. However, your sort of mental approach to your training on a step-by-step basis is probably the large determiner of your immediate trainability.
Yep.
So the pros that I've had the honor of working with / training alongside, they're all pretty obsessive personality traits, and they really get in and take care of business. And I think it's very easy to become complacent when everything in your being is telling you, maybe just slow down, or maybe, that's enough. Whereas, good is good, better is best. Yeah. So training mentality would be one area. In addition to that, from a nutritional perspective, I mean, there's so much that you can go into that. However, just the little things which people tend to overlook in terms of, timing and frequency. For whatever reason, people seem to put meal timing and frequency to the side and say it's not overly important.
Yeah.
And yes, on the hierarchy of your nutritional variables, it might not be the top of the list, but it's something you really need to consider when it comes to optimizing your result dieting. And then a final piece, I could go on forever here, but a final piece I would say is really focusing on posing. Bodybuilding is that's part of the art of bodybuilding, and I don't think people pay enough attention to that. And I don't think that people really, again, that we all have to pose in a very similar way. We've got our six muscularity poses, etc. But you need to tweak your posing for your muscle architecture.
Yeah.
So how much do you need to flex the knee and hip in your side poses to maximize your hamstring sweep? And how much do you want to rotate through the upper body to give yourself the best, width and fullness in your side chest, etc.
Yep.
So really getting in and personalizing posing, I think, would be something else that people tend to brush over a little bit.
Yeah, it's amazing how many athletes overlook posing when that's really the game that we're playing here at the end of the day. Like on stage, that's what you're going to do.
Oh, yeah.
So you should put some effort into it.
People always say the end of contest prep, but man, I was so tired. I'm like, that's the best time to pose. If you can pose after a big, session, then you can absolutely pose on stage. Like, rest assured.
100%. Talking about nutrition timing too, it's something that, like you'd mentioned, is often overlooked. But if we look at it from a peak maximum performance, we're trying to be the best bodybuilders we can be. It is important, right? Like if you're someone who's just a general pop, fitness, health, all that kind of stuff, then yes, that's not the top of your priority, right? Get your caloric intake sorted out, focus on eating healthy first and foremost. But, for someone like yourself who's competing at the pro level, your intake and timing and how to maximize that definitely would pay off.
Absolutely. I mean, I always tell my athletes that the magnitude of which carbohydrate timing affects your training performance scales with how low your calories get. So the low, off season, hey, train at whatever time of the day, your glycogen saturation is at a point that's conducive to good performance. When you're dieting, when do you need that substrate availability? I need it now.
Yep. So
really, considering carbohydrate timing. On top of that, I would also consider obviously optimizing pulsatile protein dosing, and within that, noting there's going to be some level of anabolic resistance associated with dieting. So potentially looking at altering the dose of protein per meal, and within that considering obviously the volume of leucine, and then an additional consideration would be obviously the final meal of the day, potentially looking at bumping up to sort of 0.4 to potentially 0.45 grams per kilo protein, just to ensure you've got the amino acid availability to take you through that fast. That should be some high quality sleep, hopefully. So little things like that go a real long way. And yeah, for a general population individual, like, are you going to talk about meal timing? No, you're going to really think about the big rocks. But I always say, the 1%ers add up. If there's a few points that you optimize and it's 2% better, that's 100% worth it on a pro stage for sure.
For sure. So moving forward for yourself, what's kind of the game plan now? So 2019 was the last season. Obviously, we're in the middle of the craziest times ever. But what's kind of your game plan moving forward? Are you going to compete 2021, 2022?
That is a really, really good question. So a bit of background. Coming off 2019, I had a phenomenal season. I really enjoyed that. The WNBF show, a little bit of unfinished business.
What show did you do, by the way? I don't know if I asked you that.
For WNBF?
Yeah.
I did WNBF Worlds.
You did the Worlds.
So,
Okay.
yeah, so I did Worlds. I got a second place there, which in some ways was deserved. Basically, the judging feedback I got was basically that I did break the rules by using a product on my skin, so Dream Tan I shouldn't have used.
Right.
And instead of disqualification, which was merited, they shaved 1 point per judge off 2 judges, which shaved me out of first place, which is very, very understanding. So I'm grateful they didn't disqualify me on that occasion. So coming off that show, I said, okay, I really want to do WNBF again. So I plan to do a show in season A, so the middle of the year next year. However, since then, obviously things have changed. Not necessarily with what's going on in the world that's changed my mind, but since then, I'm currently looking to pursue some further postgrad education. So I've essentially committed myself to another couple of years with a master's degree, and that's going to carry me through for a bit longer. In that it's quite challenging. I've done it before to compete with a full coaching cohort plus studying in a part-time or full-time capacity. So right now it's a little bit up in the air. It's quite likely that I have a couple of years off, and that's not specifically because I really think it's best for my physique, but rather just to focus on my athletes and my other academic endeavors.
Awesome. I think I'm frozen on your screen, but I'm still here. I'm frozen on mine.
Yep.
So was there any feedback on your physique at any of these events at that level? Did they give you any positive, negative takeaways?
Yeah, look, I always ask for feedback, and I always advise my athletes to do the same. There's always something to improve on your physique. I think even if you're Ronnie Coleman at the peak of your career, you would find something to improve on. I think the balance is always, being content with what you have and striving for better. And the feedback I got across the board was conditioning was a strong point. I always appreciate that. That was definitely something that we focused on. And then from there, it was just essentially, more size. And maybe sometimes there was a comment on my posing. So I transitioned between my poses in a very specific way, sort of I suppose my bit of personalization. No federation had an issue with it aside from WNBF. They just said, just turn into your poses, like black and white. I went, okay, if that's what you want, I can do that.
Yeah.
So, but size is a never-ending piece. Can you ever be too big?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
Keep going.
Especially in the natural realm. We've got plenty of room. That's awesome.
True.
Talk about your coaching a little bit. How long has that been going on? The good, the bad. Is it going good right now?
Yeah, I can give you a bit of background there. So, I essentially started personal training in 2012, basically fresh out of high school. At that point, I was continuing my study as well. 2013 or 14, I have to double check that. One of those years I started bodybuilding, and then a couple of years later, I had the opportunity to work to basically be mentored by one of Australia's best at the time. And I worked within his business as a contest preparation coach.
Nice.
And 2016, I went out on my own as BK Conditioning, and we've been servicing the online realm since then. And yeah, it's bodybuilding is something I'm exceptionally passionate about, and nutrition science is something I'm also equally passionate about. So to have the opportunity to apply that to athletes that are willing to take it to that top level is an absolute pleasure. And obviously, recently it's been a bit challenging with shows being cancelled. Obviously, we had a great team lined up for the most recent season, and most of those guys were a few weeks out and definitely looking 100% with when their shows were cancelled. We've got a couple of shows coming up at the end of the year here in Australia. I know that over in the States and Canada, things are a little bit up in the air, but I do have a few clients over there as well that are still holding in there, and my fingers and toes are crossed for them.
Yeah.
But it's been remarkable to see how well people have adapted. Working with bodybuilders, we're especially with the level that I do, they're very serious athletes. So people have one day to the next went out and bought things, built things. I got a client that's an engineer that went and built his own Smith machine within a matter of days. It's
Wow.
mind blowing. So yeah, a lot of people still doing good things despite the world around them, and credit to them, absolutely.
For sure. All right, man. Let's close this out with just a couple pieces of advice to the up and coming athlete. Maybe they're getting ready for their teen class, or there's some juniors coming into the game. What would you give them as some pieces of advice?
Piece of advice. I can give a couple pieces of advice. Number one, for someone that is coming into the sport, as self-serving as it sounds, coach, my advice would be to find a mentor as soon as possible, just to limit your muck around time. I think a lot of people, the first couple of years of their training career is semi-effective, whereas if you can get on the right track from the get-go, that's when we start seeing athletes turn pro in their juniors, which would never happen in the early 2000s, right?
Yeah.
So getting mentorship from the start will definitely kickstart your career. In addition to that, I think most people, when they start, they really get fixated, a bit off topic here, but when they get very fixated in contest preparation on the discomfort of preparation. I'm hungry. My feet hurt because it feels like my calcaneus is going to stick out the bottom of the fat pad. My ischial tuberosity is going to push in my glutes. My glutes are striated. Like, life's a bit uncomfortable. Yeah. My advice is to embrace and try and find enjoyment in every aspect you possibly can within that preparation. Yeah. You need to remember that we do this for fun. Yeah. So, embrace the hunger, etc., and enjoy it as much as you possibly can. That's my advice.
That's awesome, man. Well, again, I appreciate you coming on. Plug all your Instagram and socials. Where can people find you?
So you can find me on Instagram at Brandon Kempter or BK Conditioning. I am also on Facebook, but I don't have a business page on Facebook, but you can find my personal page there. If you would like to add me there and drop me a message, you are super welcome to do that, and follow along.
Awesome, man. Well, thank you again. I appreciate you taking time out of your morning across the world to do this with me.
Not a problem. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
All right, people, if you enjoyed this episode, please give it a like and subscribe here on YouTube and follow Brandon. His socials will be linked down below, and we'll see you guys in the next episode.